So I recently completed Dead2y Premonition 2, and I love it. I'm not sure whether I enjoy it more than the first one quite yet, but it had more things in it that were to my tastes than the first one. I can say at least that much with certainty. I did play the game without any patches or updates, as that's how I like to play everything. And I didn't look up exactly what the patches or updates did until the game was over. At least I did my best to avoid spoiling myself on that. And it turns out that the updates and patches squashed some bugs, changed some things for quality of life reasons, and changed some character dialogue. So I want to talk about Dead2y Premonition 2's update, why it happened, and some other associated things that inevitably come up when we patch games in this way. There are going to be lots of spoilers in this talk, fair warning. So Dead2y Premonition 2 post-update is a different game for a few reasons. York no longer rambles on his skateboard by himself, now you have to prompt him to ramble with the use of a talk button. The frame rate is improved, and it seems like they fixed the glitch where the controls stop responding when you're in the dungeon segments. I'm not a big fan of these changes, but it's good that they're there for people who want them. The gameplay is definitely objectively improved by these changes. That said, Dead2y Premonition 2's update also featured a change in some character dialogue. Now, before I go any further, I want to state rather explicitly for the record that I am transgender myself. I don't believe that that's the sort of thing that should give someone extra points when they're stating opinions like this, but it does allow you to know that I know where the people who have complaints are coming from, and that I've experienced the thing that they find horrifying about what we're about to discuss. In the game Dead2y Premonition 2, there is the character Helena Doman, or Lena Doman, as she's known. She is transgender. Her history and her decision to transition is important to the story and character drama. Nothing wrong with that so far. But there's a point in the narrative where our main character York confronts Lena Doman and uses her dead name as something of a gotcha statement, which drew a lot of criticism and complaints. This dialogue was removed in an update. And personally, as a transgendered person who has a physical recoiling reaction when I am dead named, I thought that the reaction people had to the scene was incredibly overblown. Now, for context, you need to know what kind of game Dead2y Premonition 2 is, and what kind of game Dead2y Premonition is. Dead2y Premonition 2 and Dead2y Premonition are games with strange characters. Strange in the sense that they behave in more human ways than we might expect. The characters in Dead2y Premonition and Dead2y Premonition 2 lie in convincing ways. They have convincing quirks, convincing faults. Their motivations are murky, and they're incredibly difficult to read a lot of the time. I think this kind of character writing is important, and Dead2y Premonition 2 itself goes into why. It's actually the first bit of fiction to go into why that I've ever seen. And granted, the entire dialogue exchange, which you're seeing on screen right now, may be there for humor, but it still perfectly explains my viewpoint. People in real life are complicated. They don't make decisions for good reasons, sometimes not even for reasons that can be understood. Their actions are confusing, often contradictory. They change their mind frequently. If you go through life trying to understand people through character motivations, you are going to have a bad time. But that is how a lot of people go through real life. They expect the reasons that others do things to make sense. And that's just not how it works. Dead2y Premonition and Dead2y Premonition 2 have characters that do things for reasons you don't fully understand, but you can comprehend that they would be done by those characters in that circumstance given what you know about them, the same way you might a real person, without it making sense in a mathematical fashion. People are an enigma, their universe is unto themselves. But we can still ascertain in Dead2y Premonition from a character's actions why they're behaving the way they might behave. And York, the main protagonist of Dead2y Premonition and Dead2y Premonition 2, takes a lot of actions, and most of his actions are incredibly foolish. He forgoes basic logic, doesn't ask questions he should, often takes the most bizarre, unnecessary route to get to his destinations, and frequently upsets others with his frank and strange assertions. This often tragically leads to him failing to protect people important to him, and the people important to him may not even know they're important to him because of his mannerisms. He, like real people, is a complex ecosystem of ideas and emotions, and as such, we can't really figure out why he misunderstands social etiquette so greatly. There's no one thing to point to, and it's not going to be resolved. But if you don't want to take my word for it, we can listen to him explain it in his own words.
You're way more narrow-minded than I took you for, Agent York.
Narrow-minded? You're just realizing this now? Of course I'm narrow-minded. I'm a selfish man who lives life according to his own rules, with no interest in common sense. Naturally, this makes me terrible at reading situations, and I often end up angering people by total accident. But is it really that big of a problem? I've still made a contribution to society by solving numerous difficult cases, and I'm still terribly charming.
York is largely incompetent at his job, largely incompetent in social interaction, but he means well. And that's something you can say about most real people, is that regardless of any other combination of factors, they generally mean well. So let me ask you a question. If a generally incompetent FBI agent who loves movies, doesn't understand social interaction, and often angers people by accident by saying inappropriate things, were to meet a transgendered individual crucial to a case, whose dead name is also relevant to the case, what do you think they would do? I think they would dead name the person. Not out of malice, of course, but because they're tone deaf, don't understand the right things to say, and think it would make for a fun gotcha moment, because that's just how they conduct themselves. As a transgendered person, and as someone who generally wants society to progress in the direction that it's steadily moving toward, at least where I live, I worry for people's ability to tolerate each other, to tolerate each other's flaws, and understand that although many of them may seem quite bad at first blush, we all mean well and we are all extremely imperfect. Folks can be ignorant. Folks make mistakes. That doesn't mean they mean you harm. And it doesn't mean art should be altered for your sake because you find some of that inside of it. It has been well demonstrated that the characters we see in fiction shape how we view people in the real world. We need more characters who are as complex and flawed and hard to read as real people. And if you can't tolerate York saying something accidentally transphobic, when he is quite audibly in favor of protecting minorities and just happens to be tone deaf, how are you going to tolerate people in real life that make the same honest mistake, or other honest mistakes of greater importance? Or to ask the question in another way, if someone misgenders a character in universe, and it makes sense for that character to be doing so, what leg do you have to stand on? Why do you want to censor it? Are you censoring the idea that accidentally transphobic people exist? The idea that someone might want to represent such a person in their art? Art reflects and often paints a portrait of life. Trying to sanitize the unpleasant aspects of life in our fiction is doing no one favors, and it makes for better propaganda than it does stories. I believe that in trying to be tolerant of people's expression, we are ironically stifling it a lot of the time. We are making ourselves more intolerant toward humans and human mistakes. Making mistakes feels like a death sentence. More so than ever, it seems that a wrong word, or a wrong thought, or a wrong curiosity expressed can completely destroy people socially. And that isn't right or fair, because people are complicated. There is not one flawless person on this planet. We hide so much of ourselves, so much of our deepest, scariest thoughts and questions, because we think that it's going to make the world better for other people to do so, to pretend to be more perfect, to not have our prejudices and confusions and ignorance. But the easiest way to get over ignorance is to demonstrate it in an environment that is understanding. That always has been the case, especially for people. Showing ignorant, real people in fiction is important, because ignorant, real people exist in real life. And most often, just like in Deadly Premonition 2, they ultimately mean well. Most people mean well, they just don't understand the best way to enact their well-meaning. What the world needs to be more tolerant of is mistakes. So that's why I think that leaving the scene as it was is far preferable to changing the dialogue, regardless of what the director may have thought about the dialogue, regardless of what any complaints may have thought about the dialogue. I think the dialogue was better as it was for moral reasons, for societal reasons, and for artistic reasons. It fits with York's character. It's better for my moral compass in particular, which granted is as subjective as anyone else's, and I believe that leaving the scene as it was would create greater understanding that ignorant people exist who mean well. No, it is not your responsibility unless you want to educate ignorant people, but you also can't change the world by beating down ignorant people who are just trying to do the right thing. Ignorance is not evil, ignorance is a flaw that we all have. Knowledge, progression of social acceptance, just a lot of good stuff in general that leads humans to flourish would turn out a lot better, go a lot faster, I think, if we allowed people to make more mistakes in an environment where we don't ridicule them for it or try to censor them for their mistakes. Just my thoughts on it. And the original intention was to end the video here, but there's actually a perfect storm of terrible things that led to not only censorship I disagree with, but the incapability of accessing the original art anymore. And the next thing we're going to talk about actually makes me feel a little ill, makes my tummy hurt a bit, but that's precisely the reason we need to talk about it. So the Nintendo Switch has an auto-update feature, where it will search for updates to software and then automatically download and install them. This is fine, games are getting updated all of the time. But the problem lies in the fact that you can't remove the update. After that update is installed, it's the only way you're allowed to play the game. If you delete the update data, it doesn't matter. The console has already stored the version history, and you can no longer run the game without the newest update. This means that if a game is updated for the worse or removes something you care deeply about, you're just stuck with the new version forever. Now, of course, there is a fix to this in most circumstances, a less than optimal fix, but a fix. You can just back up your save data to some physical media and then factory reset your console. It's not ideal, but factory resetting your console without an internet connection and then putting the physical media into the console will still at least allow you to play the original version. Your save data will be intact, everything will be fine. Except that isn't how it works on the Switch. I would know. I tried. It turns out that the Switch is basically the only console where you cannot physically back up your save data. You have to back it up to Nintendo's cloud, which costs a subscription to their online service. So let's say you have your internet turned on, Nintendo detects an update, you start a game, the update will download in the background without you really knowing about it, even after you tell the game to start without an update. And sure, you can cancel it once, but eventually that update will download as long as auto update is enabled. And if that update slips through, that's it, game over, can't play the unupdated version of the game ever again. And if I had known it was possible to turn off auto update, I would have. But I didn't before I accidentally turned on the internet while I was playing Deadly Premonition 2 and it updated. So now it is impossible for me to experience the original version of a piece of art that is important to me. I like the version where York randomly rambles on his skateboard without my input. I like the version where in his ignorance York dead names someone. I like the version where the frame rate is garbage. That's part of the charm, part of the experience to me. And sure, people should be allowed to have the versions where that's not a problem. But why does that mean denying me the one I would like to play? The original one, the one that's part of history, the one that was released that way. It already existed, I played it once, then it was redacted and taken away from me and can no longer be accessed because they took measures to make sure that I physically cannot access it. Imagine a book for a moment. Let's take my favorite book, Black Beauty. I love that book. Only the original version, the version as written by the author, which is thankfully still for sale. But most people didn't read that version, because after the author died, capitalism took hold of the book, and it was highly edited to be more appropriate for children, removing a lot of the political commentary, a lot of the religious commentary, a lot of the pro-animal rights activism, a lot of really important stuff to the art and what it's trying to say, but at least you can still get the original version. But imagine if you couldn't. Imagine if the version of Black Beauty that has important things to say about religion, about society, about animals, just doesn't exist. It's inaccessible to anyone who wants it. It's permanently erased from potential consumption because somebody found something upsetting inside of it. That's what's happened to Dead2y Premonition 2. Alright, so, now for full clarification, because while the dramatic part is out of the way and the important stuff I wanted to say out of the way, I know people are going to be curious. The reason I won't just bite deleting the save data and factory reset the console is because I'm not the only one using that switch. My roommate uses the Switch, and some save data that's important to him is on there. Save data from Animal Crossing, save data from Brigandine, stuff like that. So if I were to factory reset the Switch because I want to experience the original Dead2y Premonition 2, it would also delete all his save data. I shouldn't have to worry about that. I should just be able to play the game I bought as I bought it. Nintendo is actively, intentionally taking steps to make it hard, if not impossible, to play games the way they were originally released, and it blows. Secondly, as to the Black Beauty comparison, I'm sure a lot of people think Black Beauty's social commentary, political commentary, and religious commentary is of far more importance than what I personally saw in York Dead naming someone. But the thing is, I don't really care which you think is more important. I don't care which the director of Dead2y Premonition 2 thinks is more important. I don't even care which one I personally think is more important, because it's not about that. They're both ideas expressed through fiction. Who gets to be the arbiter that decides one idea gets to live and the other gets to die? Both of the ideas existed, one of them was censored instead of engaged with. That's what's wrong. Lastly, I know that I said out loud, and I stand by it, that we need more works of fiction with realistic, flawed people who behave like people, not like characters. That doesn't mean for even one moment that I think we should force people to make that kind of fiction. People should make the kind of fiction they want to make, whether or not I agree with it, whether or not I think it's ideal, and I love a ton of fiction where the characters act like cartoons instead of like real people. I just think that when the fiction's out, when it's released, when it's there in the world, it's no longer the artist's anymore. It belongs to everyone, and you should not try to erase it because you disagree with something inside of it. Alright, I think that's all I wanted to say. I think we're all good here for now.